to see it, I'll show it. That's fine. I'll do it. Hang on. Okay, yeah, it's fine. But I don't think I really talked to you about the custom of whipping and how they did that. It's shown in the video, of course, but
Jesus would have been much worse than that.
what?
Jesus would have been much worse than that. There was
Oh, this kind of question.
I mean, yeah, it quite possibly it would be, yes.
Just looking right this line.
It could.
So
It could. I mean, it's just, yeah.
and
He had lost a lot of blood even before he ever got to the cross. He was in critical condition before he even got there, which is part of why, for a crucifixion victim, he died relatively quickly. So we have this written in Matthew 27. Then he, Pilate, released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered a whole battalion before him. And they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. And twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head. They were long thorns, those thorns that are back there. I can't remember which mother gave me those, but she got those in Israel. And those are the kinds of thorns that crown up. And they mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they spit on him, and they took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of his robe and put his clothes on him and led him away to be crucified. So here's a description of the whipping that he would have gotten. The heavy whip is brought down with full force again and again across the person's shoulders, back, and legs. At first, the heavy thongs. So there's this whip that has a number of leather thongs on it, and then they would put on there pieces of bone, fragments of bone, rocks, metal, and so that metal balls, lead balls, and so it wasn't just a whip. It also it didn't just inflict damage when the whip came down, but whatever part of the body was being whipped, then when they pulled it back, then it would rip the skin as well. So then as the blows continue, they cut deeper into the this is a doctor, by the way, explains, into the subcutaneous tissues, producing first an oozing of blood from the capillaries and veins of the skin, and finally spurting arterial bleeding from the vessels in the underlying muscles. The small balls of lead first produce large, deep bruises, which are broken open by the subsequent blows. Finally, the skin of the back is hanging in long ribbons, and the entire area is an unrecognizable mass of torn, bleeding flesh. When it is determined by the centurion in charge that the prisoner is near death, the beating is finally stopped. So every person who had a verdict of crucifixion in court, it was customary to tie that person to a post, and they would be severely whipped. They stripped of his clothes and severely whipped in this way. That whip that I just described to you was known as a flagrum. It had a large, sturdy handle, and then it had these leather thongs attached to it with those things, the jagged bones and a piece of bone and the lead and the rocks woven into them. The Jews, by law, limited their lashes to 40, and they would count to 39 and stop at 39, because in case somebody miscounted, you wouldn't have accidentally broken the law. But there's no understanding of how the Romans, however, that's who whipped him, had any such compulsion. They probably didn't have any sort of a limit. And so this is how it is described, what I've just read to you. So a man condemned to be crucified then had to carry his own cross from the place where he had been he had been in prison or had his verdict to the place of the execution. Now, what we see in pictures is Jesus dragging an entire cross. That actually isn't what happened. There are two parts to the cross. The patibulum is the one that goes across the victim's shoulders, the crossbar. I'm having trouble remembering the name of the one. The stapes is the one that goes into the ground. That was permanently fixed at the site of the crucifixion. So Jesus would have had this roughly hewn, about 110 pound beam strapped to his already whipped shoulders to carry to the cross. And by this time, he is in fairly critical condition already. And so he is near death even before he gets to the cross. So if you need to close your eyes, what I'm hearing you saying is that you would like to see at least part of this. Feel free to close your eyes. Your teacher will. But I think that this is a fairly accurate portrayal of what Jesus. One of these days. One of these days. I don't even remember the else back. I thought.
She just came on, she was smiling, and I was like, yep, I want you. What's the name of the girl?
What? Yeah, we only got a minute.
It was when the devil thing was.
Yeah, we say.
Yeah. Yeah,
You should. Gladiator.
We were like right here.
Prendere non posso! Resistenza sua incredibile! Possono immaginare, no? Fate piacere! Guys. Prova il tutto! Quale? Come so fare? Gusta! Gusta! Not fast, you!
God so loved you. This is part of what God gave, what Jesus willingly suffered. Mrs. Rock said that we sanitize. We sanitize. Which is why I think it's important, even though it's hard, to really understand what Christ gave. He said, nobody takes my life from me. I willingly lay it down. I don't know how accurate it is that Jesus fell and then he stood up again to be beaten. It wouldn't surprise me. Because he said he would drink the full cup of God's wrath, out of love for us. And he did. But that was just the beginning. Then we get to the death of Christ and the cross. And again, Dr. Davis describes the agony of this. They take the victim carrying his crossbar, and of course Jesus fell under the weight of that. Simon of Cyrene carried it the rest of the way. But they would lay the victim down and throw him down onto that crossbar. Again, these shoulders that have been pulverized by a whipping. And they would stretch out the arms, not fully, there'd be a little bit of room, and they would put a nail in between, in the wrist, in between the ulna and the radius. And then they would drag on both sides, and they would drag that bar up, put it into a pot, into a notch that was in the stapes. And then they would cross the 2 feet over each other, and the ankle would drive one nail between 2 feet that would go into the stapes. It sometimes took days for a crucifixion victim to die. It usually took a long time. Jesus was apparently about 3 hours, much shorter time. And you actually die of suffocation. So here's the description of what happens to the crucifixion victim. As the arms fatigue, great waves of cramps sweep over the muscles, knotting them in deep, relentless, throbbing pain. With these cramps comes the inability to push himself upward. So the only way that you can breathe when you're on the cross, because of the crushing weight on your lungs, is to push up on the nails in your feet and to grab a breath in. Because you can breathe out, but you can't breathe in. And over time, the arms become so cramped and the legs become so cramped that they can't do that. So that comes the inability to push himself upward. Hanging by his arms, the pectoral muscles are paralyzed and the intercostal muscles are unable to act. Air can be drawn into the lungs, but it cannot be exhaled. Jesus fights to raise himself in order to get even one short breath. Finally, carbon dioxide builds up in the lungs, and the bloodstream and the cramps partially subside. Spasmodically, he is able to push himself upward to exhale and bring in the life-giving oxygen. So this was an excruciating death. In fact, that word excruciating means out of the cross. And the Romans devised it to be the most horrific form of punishment and death that there could be. It wasn't fast. It was a long, bloody, horrific ordeal. Since it was the day of preparation, so the day to prepare for the Passover, or not for the Passover, for the Sabbath, because it was Friday, and so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for the Sabbath was a high day. That means it was like a special Sabbath. It was a Sabbath during the Passover, so or a feast of unleavened bread at this point. So it was an extra special Sabbath. The Jews asked Pilate if their legs might be broken and they might be taken away. If you break their legs, they can no longer push up, and they die much quicker that way. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs, fulfilling Scripture. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. And that also is medically accurate, and also is prophecy being fulfilled. We're going to play a clip from the cross. So Jesus is crucified, and on Friday afternoon, and Friday evening, because the time for sundown was coming, they went to ask for Jesus' body for burial. We're told in this is what we're told in Mark 15. And when evening had come, since it was the day of preparation, that is the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, who was also himself looking for the kingdom of God, he was part of the Sanhedrin, that's the council, took courage and went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Pilate was surprised to hear that he should have already died. And summoning the centurion, he asked him whether he was already dead. And when he learned from the centurion that he was dead, he granted the corpse to Joseph. Nicodemus also, who had earlier come to Jesus by night, came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds in weight. And they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen cloths with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. Then Joseph took the body and wrapped it in clean linen, in a clean linen shroud, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut in the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the entrance of the tomb and went away. So, I'm not going to read that yet. So the body of Jesus was placed in a new tomb, hewn out of solid rock, almost like a cave-like structure, in a burial area. And Jewish tombs usually had an entrance of about 4.5 to 5 feet high, and most tombs had a front room sort of thing with benches built in where bodies would be laid. There was room for multiple bodies in a family group. I think I told you when you were sophomores that the bodies would stay there for about a year, and after about a year they would go in and they would take a box called an ossuary, and they would put the bones in the box, and then in the second room there were niches in the wall for those ossuaries to be put in place. Of course, none of that happened to Jesus because he rose from the dead. And then there was this trough in front, and a huge stone that would be rolled down into the trough. You remember that when Peter and John got to the tomb, John looked, kind of bent down to look in, because the tomb was literally only, 4.5, 5 feet high, and it had this trough in front of it. So you would have to look down to see, or bend down to look into that trough. and that stone was large and it was heavy. And we read that it would have been about 3,000 to 4,000 pounds in weight. And then we read that Joseph asks for Jesus's body, goes and aligns himself as a member of the council, as a member of the Sanhedrin, aligns himself with Jesus. And Nicodemus also. And Nicodemus brings 75 pounds. And this was their form of embalming. These sweet smelling, like they crush woods that were sweet smelling and oils that were sweet smelling together. And it was kind of this mixture, this thick but gritty mixture of sweet smelling things. And they would wrap the body in linen and they would put the mixture in between the different layers of the shroud. Over 100 pounds probably in weight, the whole thing, by the time it was done. And then they would have rolled the stone, the very large stone, down the trough into into the trough where it would be secure. And it wouldn't have been easy to have rolled down that incline, but certainly it would have been impossible to roll it back up that incline. Certainly 2 men even couldn't do that. And so then it happens that the next day, that is after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember how that impostor said while he was still alive, after 3 days I will rise. Therefore, order the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day, lest his disciples go and steal him away and tell the people that he has risen from the dead. And the last fraud will be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard of soldiers. Go make it as secure as you can." So they went and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone and setting a guard. So what exactly does that mean? Well, it would have been a Roman guard that was standing watch, and that was the most powerful fighting force on the planet of that time, in that day. So there would have been the rock, and there would have been 4 soldiers in front of that rock, and the seal would have been a cord that went across and was sealed on either side with the Roman signature saying you can't pass this point, you can't move this. And there would have been 16 guards altogether in front of the tomb. Now, some would sleep while others would stand guard, but there was always somebody standing guard, and to fall asleep on your post was punishable by death. So in order for the disciples to get there to steal the body, which they didn't know to do and they were too afraid to do, but even if they did know to do it, and if they had been bold enough to do it, they would have had to walk over sleeping guards, most famous fighting force on the planet, and fight off 4 armed Roman soldiers, at least 4 armed Roman soldiers, to get to it. It's not possible that they could have done that. We'll pick up here tomorrow. Thank you for not just getting up and walking out.